And welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, episode 161. Today we're looking at the Cinematic Challenge. I set a challenge for viewers 2 weeks ago and gave a big talk about how to make your photos look more cinematic. And so now we're going to be looking at the photos that people have sent in. So that's what today is about. So yes, here we are, live on YouTube, unless you happen to be watching the recording. Either way, make sure you subscribe, you click like. If you are subscribing, click the little notification bell as well, so that you know when future episodes are turning up. A little bit hectic here, sort of some last minute rushing as I realised that Microsoft did one of its major updates recently, and suddenly, if I hadn't actually changed the settings, I would have ended up with that high squeaky voice coming through. It always seems to mess around with my microphone settings for some reason. Anyway, that aside, if you do happen to be watching live, please leave a comment, say hello, let me know where you are, tell me what the weather's like, and we'll get the chat going. I can see we've got a couple of comments in already. Meg says hello everyone. Robert joins us and says howdy all from a hot and sunny Texas. Sandra says hello everyone from Birmingham, where the sun has just started to come out. Janet B says hello from a smuggy Mississauga. Still never entirely sure how to pronounce that, but yeah, I know it's in Canada. Stacey says good morning. Rainy Sunday in Hatboro, Pennsylvania. Muggy too. Threat of another flood in our area and a tornado watch. Well, that's not sounding particularly good. Hope everything's okay with you and your friends there, Stacey. Susan says hello from a sunny but breezy Tyneside. Susan's usually so opposite end, other side of the country over in Tyneside. Susan's usually just 9 miles down the road in Kakubri. Nice to see you got the sun there. We've got it a bit cloudy and overcast, very windy at the moment here. Rosemary says, good morning, nice to be able to join live and excited to see what everyone has accomplished in the last couple of weeks, certainly here in the Pacific Northwest. And John says, hello from Columbus, Ohio. So, welcome everyone. Yes, so here we are. Today then we're going to be talking about the Cinematic Challenge. Oh, how was that? Robert's just said, I take it back, it's raining. It is raining like the UK. I thought you said it was sunny. Now it's raining. I suppose that is more like the UK. Certainly we've been getting a lot of weather. We have a lot of weather here at the moment. There's an old saying in Scotland that if you don't like the weather, hang around an hour and you'll get something else. So, yes, where were we? So, 2 weeks ago, I set a cinematic challenge. And there's this thought that you see, I mean, if you think about the movies, the whole point of the movies is moving pictures. That's what it's short for. And it's this idea that you had paintings, then you had photography, and then you had moving photography. And that's where movies kind of started out. And a movie film is a bunch of little images that are just shown in front and 24 frames per second or 48 frames per second now, some of the ones that are done. So if movies are just a whole mass of photos, what if you take one photo, can you make it look like it's come from a movie? Because quite often if you're doing something that sort of looks like it's from a cinema, it has a slightly different mood and feel than just an ordinary photograph. And there are two things that tend to give it a very distinct difference. The first tends to be the crop ratio. And we talked quite a lot about that notion that most movies are done in a widescreen format. And there are different variations on this, but your rough rule of thumb guide is they tend to be around about twice as wide as they are high. So you end up with more of a letterbox kind of ratio. And when you've got that, it gives it a more cinematic look. The other aspect of it is the idea that a good photo, that sort of a cinematic type photo, is giving it a sense of time. That there's a sense of if you think of any movie that you watch, any one frame isn't really lingered on for more than a fraction of a second before the next scene comes up. And some, of course, you have action where a lot is happening very, very quickly. So there's always a sense with whichever bit of a movie, if you press the pause button on, something has happened on the run up to it, or something is going to happen after it. And so if you are trying to create a photo that has a cinematic feel, in an ideal world, you want to try and capture that sense of either resolution or anticipation or something. There's something which makes the viewer look at it and go, wonder what's coming next, or wonder what's just happened. What goes beyond the boundaries, the temporal boundaries of that photo. So that's kind of where we were, these were some of the ideas that I talked about. Now, we've had, I think, 9 people send in images. So what we're going to do today is we're going to go take a look through the photos that everybody sent in and maybe reflect on some of them. And hopefully what it will do is inspire you. Don't think of this, although what we're going to be doing is, we're going to be, this is the end of this run on cinematic imagery in Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres. Don't think of this as the end of your understanding. Think of this as your launching point. Think of this as, all this and what you see today as well is hopefully going to inspire you to move forward with your photography and allow that idea of cinematic crop or cinematic ideals or thoughts or processes to become part of your toolbox when you're doing photography. Because sometimes when you're doing photos, some kind of Instagram square style image is exactly what you need. Sometimes you want to have something which is a little bit more portrait or landscape. And sometimes an image just cries out for being cinematic. And the more you practice that, the more it becomes part of your tool. So sometimes when you're in the right situation, that's the way to go. Couple more comments here. What have we got? Stacey says, I missed the last 2 weeks due to scheduling at store, was asked to work on a Sunday. Oh, well, sorry to hear that. But little reminder to anybody, of course, there is catch up. All these programs these episodes are recorded on YouTube, and so you can go and find the previous 160. They're all sitting there. You don't necessarily have to watch all of them all the way from start to finish. Of course, I expect you to do that, but in reality, you can dive in and dip in and out. I do menus on each of them, so you can kind of leap to particular spots if you want. John says, hi Kim, I've got the grandchildren, we'll have to watch later. Yeah, we actually have our granddaughter Poppy staying with us today, which is rather lovely too. Rosemary says, it was fun going through the submissions to your PhotoCrowd contest. It helps me appreciate just how helpful and specific your advice has been. Thank you. Oh, and Susan's also got grandchildren, but they've managed to escape. Yes, actually, that's a good point. Thank you for reminding me of that, Rosemary. That currently on PhotoCrowd, for those of you who are on PhotoCrowd, I decided to set a cinematic PhotoCrowd challenge to tie in pretty much with this. So that kicked into place on Wednesday, so I guess finishes probably Tuesday at midnight or something like that. So if you learn any extra things from this and you would like to apply them, if you're on PhotoCrowd, stick your image into the PhotoCrowd challenge that I've set up. Now, I will just say I end up with 1,000+ photos to go through and rate. I'm unlikely to know whether I'm not told when I'm rating the photos who the photo comes from. So there will be no favoritism as such if I'm highly unlikely to recognise your photo. But I think it's worth joining in and sort of seeing how other people are also interpreting. I will just say, just between you and me and our little group here, a lot of the stuff that I've seen coming in so far doesn't fit the brief. Okay, people are not giving me a cinematic crop. And when I've said this is a cinematic challenge, a cinematic crop is really an important part of that. Then there are some people giving me a cinematic crop, but the picture itself isn't very cinematic. But at the very least, try and give the cinematic crop. And they're given the number of people who aren't doing that if you do that, you'll at the very least get a merit. So I'll maybe remind you of that again at the end of the podcast if I remember. Right, okay, so what do we move on to? Let's make a start with this. So where I wanted to start, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with one of my favourite submissions today. And that came from Andy. So, where's that gone? No, not that. Here we go. Yes. So, Andy sent in this one. Now, what's interesting about this one from Andy is Andy very often does square or near square images. And we've talked a little bit before. I've chatted a bit before with Andy about his particular crop ratio. So for Andy, he turned around, he sent this one in, and he said, where are we? Let me see if I can find it. A cinematic photo crop. This is a 1:185 crop portrait to create the film noir style close-up. I think I might even recognise the original of this, which is quite, again, it's kind of more squarish. But he's gone in and he's gone in close, and by creating that widescreen element, it sometimes feels that little bit more intimate with it. And I think it's a really powerful crop mechanism from this. It's quite different to a kind of square portrait. The only thing I would say with this one, Andy, is I feel there's maybe a touch too much forehead with this. The crop line goes up and you're really just clipping the hairline. And one of those little things that tends to happen a lot, I've talked before with cropping, is just like on bodies, you don't crop at the elbows, you don't crop at the knees or the wrists or the ankles, you don't crop at the limbs, you crop at mid-arm or at calf, mid-thigh. And it's just it's kind of an easy thing to think of, is just don't crop at the joints, you crop in the middle of the limb. Similarly, when it comes to that, you can crop in the middle of the forehead, don't crop on the eyebrows, and don't crop on the hairline. And part of it is because of the way the brain interprets what comes next. If I crop on the mid-arm, the brain interprets the fact that there's already been this much space on this side of the arm, so now there's going to be this much space on the side of the arm before you get to the hand. Whereas if you crop on the wrist, the brain goes, the arm's been that long, it's now going to be that long again, and it sort of interprets the idea that the arm ends up being much, much longer than it actually is. There's a little thing here, which is by cropping at the hairline, it sort of extends the forehead up. The brain starts filling in the details, and so it makes the forehead look larger than it actually is. Just bringing that down a touch. I'll tell you what I will do, because I do want to show you. I mean, don't get me wrong, Andy. I love this photo. I love this photo in every other way. All I'm trying to do here is take what's an excellent photo and just tidy it that fraction. So if we take the crop here and you just pull that down a little bit here, and suddenly it works so much better. Now, there is a slight problem with the fact that I can see what you were doing. You wanted to get a little bit more of that smoke coming in. When you've got that lovely bit of smoke coming off the cigarette, but when you're here, you miss that. Perhaps what you do at that point is, I didn't quite mean to do that, let's go back to here, is if you were to rotate it slightly, tell you what, we'll do the content aware fill. So you just rotate that a fraction, so we've got the smoke coming up, and then we have her mid, something like that, fraction more, just to get a little bit more smoke coming out of there. And then if I hit that like that, you see, I think that's a more comfortable crop than that. Do you see? It just sort of changes the amount of forehead you think this person has, and it allows us to kind of come in and concentrate more on the eyes and this fantastic expression and gaze she's got going straight into the lens. But brilliant photo, Andy, absolutely brilliant photo. So serious smug points to you for that one, and thank you so much for sending that one in. Right, Sandra says, film noir, lovely photo. Stacey says, very cool, love the black and white, almost reminds us of old cinema, Casablanca. Robert says, feels like film noir, excellent. Rosemary says, slight rotation was perfect, and she really likes it. And Stacey also likes the good crop. Cool. Okay, so let's move on. So the next one up then is Rosemary. Now, Rosemary said, your challenge came right at a time of the buck moon. So I was able to get some shots of it rising over the foothills of Mount St. Helens. It was just a few degrees south of the mountain itself, but we weren't able to leave our property to chase it, unfortunately. What a single frame doesn't catch is how very quickly the moon travels. This is very true. Anybody, it's one of those things, we look at the moon in the sky, and when you've got no other reference point, it doesn't seem to move very fast at all. It looks quite static. But when it's on the horizon, and you can see it actually moving against the horizon, you blink, and it suddenly seems to have moved again. And if you're using a zoom lens, then it gets exaggerated even more. So yeah, to actually get the moon right on the horizon, also without the clouds, I think is quite something there. So, you know, smug points to you there, Rosemary, for managing to get that. I think it's also quite interesting. It is to you know, as in terms of a cinematic crop, it does have that kind, and you know, that widescreen suits it well. We've got the foliage here. got the blue, deep blue of the kind of night sky. It does feel perhaps slightly oversaturated with the blue. Not totally sure. It might work. I mean, I would maybe play with saturation a little bit, see how it looks. But then, mind you, having said that, if this was on an online PhotoCrowd or Guru Shots type site, then you probably do want to have that extra level of saturation. But no, I think it's great. I think it's and what the moon does, although it's primarily a landscape shot, what the moon does, because we know the moon is moving, at this point we don't know whether it's setting or it's rising. We're going with your fact that it's rising. But that in itself has a sense of anticipation. So a rising moon, maybe the point the werewolf is about to come out. But there is that sort of sense of movement, of something happening. So you kind of, you manage to tick both boxes on that one as well. So smug points to you there, Rosemary. Well done for capturing that one. Stacey says, good capture of the moon. Sandra says, really unusual moon shot. I love it dipping behind the mountains. It's not dipping behind, it's coming up. That's the point. Moonrise rather than moonset. And Meg says, absolutely beautiful photo. Cool. Right. Okay, well, the next one comes in from Bennitito. Not heard from Bennitito for a little while, but he was having fun with a kind of Back to the Future style shoot. And so Bennitito sent in and said he had a DeLorean owner who wanted some pictures after a restoration, and so began a shoot from a quib. I said, shame you haven't got the Back to the Future kit. And he said, well, we have. So I knew a model, Florence, who was obsessed with the musical and has seen it over 20 times in London. So after the normal, or the plain shoot for the DeLorean Owners Club magazine, out with some robo lights and Flo turned up, and all Lorraine Baines. Crop is widescreen 1:8, 5:1 again. So this is great. This is fun. So it's got the widescreen crop, and to actually have the kit where you've got it says up there, disconnect the capacitor drive before opening. Lots of fun playing around with the lighting. Gone for that sort of again, that sort of orangey blue, the kind of boost of the colours, giving it that little bit more kind of 80s sci-fi feel to it. Got the hoverboard. Yeah, a fun one there, Bennitito, I think. I mean, first of all, who wouldn't want to sort of photograph a DeLorean if you could get near one? So what a wonderful gig to get. But then to be able to actually play around and do that kind of Back to the Future style shot, a lot of fun. So smug points there. I'm sure you don't need them. I can imagine you feeling pretty smug after that one yourself. So thank you for sending that one in, Bennitito. And Sandra says, I love the lighting on the side of the model's face there. Yeah, absolutely. It's getting that really nice contrast between the blues and the kind of reddy oranges. Okay, next up then we have Susan. So Susan sent in this one and says, good day, Kim. And firstly, can I thank you for setting the challenge? It's a way out of my comfort zone yet again, but I'll have a go. And I'm really pleased with you for doing that, Susan. I think for some people, that comfort zone is, if it's too far out of your comfort zone, a lot of people would just withdraw from it. The fact that you stepped into it automatically gives you smug points regardless of whatever comes next. So that's really, I think that's the whole, we only improve by doing stuff that we don't know how to do. If we're constantly just repeating all the stuff that we know how to do all the time, we might get better at it, and by degrees. There comes a point whereby the amount you're getting better, nobody else is really noticing, and how satisfying is it? I think if you just get to a point whereby all you're doing is the same stuff over and over again, I kind of lost the fun. Well, it is for me. I don't know. For some people, it's they want to reach a point of perfection and then keep repeating it. Personally, I can't. I don't. I'm always wanting to try and grow and improve and change. And in order to be able to do that, I keep having to do stuff which I'm less familiar with, and I keep having to stretch myself. So yes, step outside the comfort zone whenever you can. So Susan goes on. This is perhaps not my most exciting image. Indeed, it's extremely simple, but hopefully it fits your remit. If nothing else, I've complied with the sizing. That was Good start, always a good start. I'm certainly open to criticism, so feel free. The attached image was taken during a visit to Kenmure Castle a couple of months ago. I've done a shot up at Kenmure Castle before. It's an amazing, lovely place. You'll never find it if you don't know exactly where it is. It is open to the public. You can go walking there, but there aren't any obvious signs. Unless you are really, really looking out for them. But it's an amazing space. But because few people know about it and you can't accidentally stumble across it, it doesn't tend to be covered with, swarming with tourists either. So when you do go out there, you very often got the whole place to yourself, which is rather wonderful. Where is it? She goes on. As well as the obvious image of the ruins, I found myself heading away from the castle ruin itself towards a walled garden. When I found a gate, I was hoping I would be able to open it and take the rather cliched photo of an open gate leading us into the garden beyond. However, the gate was firmly locked. I then changed my viewpoint and decided the gate is actually barring us from entry with its wire netting and locks, perhaps inviting us to peep through the gate to see what secrets lie behind. Hopefully, giving the image a cinematic crop makes more of a feature of the gate. I have tried converting it to black and white, but I didn't think it helped in it. I don't think it helped anyway. And I think you're right, actually. Black and white isn't going to really do anything with this. It's quite a textured picture. We've got the beech leaves here, we've got all the grasses here, we've got the stone wall and the lichens on the stone and the texture of the grass. And I think if you went to black and white, I think it would just probably become too busy. You kind of need that separation of the greys of the wall with the greens of the leaves and the grasses. Yes, I think that I like this. I do like this. I like the gate. I think the different ways you can go about this. You could have gone for gate in the middle here, but that would have maybe worked better if there'd been a path. There's obviously what's quite interesting about the fact that there's the gate here is that there is no path leading up to it. So it does, and as you say, there's kind of there's chicken wire and barriers across it and a lock, and it sort of has that feeling of like a gate which is no longer used. And yeah, this bit of branch here growing across it, which, so if it was regularly used, that would have been cut back. So I think you've got the crop. I think you've got an interesting photo. I think there's a sort of a bit of a sense of anticipation. I think if we're wanting to up the idea of the cinematic, there needs to be maybe a little bit more in the sense of something's maybe going to happen or something has just happened. Whereas this tends to have a feeling of a very static image. The gate isn't about to be opened. It doesn't look like it's about to fall off. It doesn't look like there's somebody walking past the other side, or even that there's an animal or something walking into the space. But in terms of a crop, I think it probably does work quite well. It does sort of draw your attention to the space over here in a way that maybe a square crop or a larger crop might not do it for you, or even a closer in might not do it for you. So I think, yes, I think playing with this sort of slightly more cinematic crop has worked in favour of the shoot. So smug points to you there, Susan, and thank you so much for sending that one in. What Sandra says, I like the lighting on the grass and the leaves and the texture on the wall. Yes, I mean, there is another sense of the weather there actually being quite pleasant, which I suppose if you're talking about changeable or what might come next, that's not always an obvious, we might get the sunshine, but it could be raining any moment afterwards. Right, okay. Next one up then is April. Now, April sent us this one and said, this photo could be the scene in an action movie, ready to roll. Everyone better get out of the way. Pretend the people in the background are just acting, but the two looking are a part of the movie. This is the only photo I have that would be under the cinema category. It is widescreen with a slight crop. So yeah, absolutely. You've got the car, quite a fancy looking car. Is that TVR? Can't quite see from this angle. Anyway, lovely convertible car heading through the crowd. So yes, it could be part of something going on. Now, what I would say here is, first of all, smug points for getting a nice car, and you've got a good crop, except for the fact that your horizon isn't straight or your verticals aren't really vertical. This is just one of those where you kind of want to tilt it a little bit, April, and that makes all the difference. Having said that, the one other thing as well, which is, if you have a sense of movement, like a person walking, somebody cycling a bike, or a car moving, generally speaking, unless there's a very, very good reason otherwise, you want to have more space in front of the moving part than there is behind. So there's a sense of it moving into the picture, unless there's something very clear about what's behind it and that the vehicle is moving away from something. But you don't have anything obviously moving away from this. So now if I just sort of show you for a moment what I mean here. Again, if we just open this in Photoshop, I'll just close Andy's one there. Again, if we go to, well, if we use content aware fill, and we just need to straighten that up, I think, and we need a little bit more space at the front than there is behind. It doesn't have to be a huge amount, but just enough to kind of feel. Now, obviously, this is, you know, is making funny things with people's bodies over there, but in terms of the rough shape, that in itself instantly makes it better. And I think something like that, then now you start to have a sense that you've got the cinematic crop, but you've just got that little bit of space in front of the car, everything straightened up. It now does feel a bit more like a scene of something happening. This wonderful, beautiful car just starting to drive through the crowds. I see there's a whole bunch of other really interesting cars, so I presume some kind of car show going on, but that could be just as much part of the movie or whatever else. So I think they're April. Smug points for the idea. You just needed to make sure that you straightened it up and that you had a little bit more space in front of the picture. But other than that, fun shoot and nicely thought about. So yeah, thanks for sending that one in, April. Sorry, I've suddenly lost which which screen I'm supposed to be looking at. Right, okay. Next up then, we have Nadia. And Nadia says, I'm on holiday and don't have access to my normal photography software. So the crop on this is 16:9 using my iPad. So this is the one that Nadia sent in. And what we've gone here for is rather lovely panoramic, reflective, the building's reflected in the surface, of the surface of the water. I like the symmetry and the reflection, and that's what made me take the picture. So yeah, absolutely, you see this and you're getting these brilliant colours, and I mean really noticeable in the kind of lighter greens, yellowy greens of the trees over on the left here, and really vibrant reflections here. Now you say you cropped this to 16:9. Interestingly, I think this would work with an even wider crop. So again, just to sort of show, what I want to get across here is this idea that it's worth playing around with different versions of crops. So again, if I create a new one here and I create, yeah, well, I've already got this open. So 2,391. So I'm going for that sort of super extreme wide by 1,000 pixels high. Then if I copy that and paste it onto here, then what I can do is I can take this and resize it to fit over the space. If I just reduce the opacity here so we can see the picture underneath, and then I can move that about as I would like it. And if we, probably you do kind of want it in the center there. And I think if we then do that, and then I actually crop that down to that size, and then get rid of the white bit, I think that actually intensifies it even more. So you've got, so what was already an interesting photo, when we crop it in, I think actually it enhances, it makes that look even more cinematic as such. In terms of the amount of space taking up in the photo, it actually makes the cabins look slightly larger. Proportionally, they're taking up a larger part of the photo than they were. But also, I think when we were at this stage here, some of the reflections, the darker reflections of the dark parts of the trees up there are okay, but they're not necessarily adding in. The real fun part of the reflections, I think, is in the more vibrant and that contrast just to the right here. And we don't need to overdo. You're not gaining anything necessarily by having that extra bit at the bottom or that extra bit at the top. This still has enough of all the elements in it that you wanted, but it's distilled it. Yeah, distilled, I suppose, is the right word for this. There's another word I'm trying to think of, which is escaping me. But basically that idea of intensifying the mood of what you're getting. So sometimes it is, again, it's that just worth that playing around with that crop. The 16:9 is your kind of starting point. But look at the 1:185, look at the 2:1, look at the 1:2.4 more or less. And I think that, you know, see, sometimes if you go too far, you'll know it. But it's always worth playing around just to sort of see where you can take that to. But beautiful picture. It certainly kind of makes me feel like somewhere I would like to kind of go and put my feet up for the afternoon. So thank you for sending that one in, Nadia. What else have we got? Oh, Sandra said great car, and then lovely lighting and reflections in the lake. Rosemary says such a calming photo, Nadia. I vote for the longer, shorter crop, so the excess top is removed as well. Cool. Okay. So let's move on then, and we'll go to John, and John sent us this one, which I think works really well with this crop. Nice black and white, kind of gives that kind of gritty urban feel. I mean, there's this old concrete. I think the black and white works. I think this is a really nice widescreen crop here. John basically says, just here's my effort for cinematic cropping. There, he hasn't given me any more story on it. But I think as a photo in itself, it works. The sense of anticipation of something just happened or something about to happen, again, maybe slightly less. Having said that, always what works in its favour as well is the fact that you've got the diagonals, the fact that this moves up to the right and then that moves up to the left. Diagonals always give a sense of movement and add a little bit of energy into a picture. So even in a static image, there's a sort of sense of movement or energy about it, and we can kind of, like we're waiting for somebody to come into the scene, whether they're pushing a pram or riding a bike or just a couple of friends walking or somebody carrying their shopping. You would expect some kind of everyday scene in here, but that could also be quite interesting itself, depending on the kind of person that you had in the shot. But I think, but in terms of crop of the picture in its own right, I think it works really well. You've got just enough space here for us to see this is the entrance, and you've not cropped it off at the end here. We've got a little bit of space at the end to know that you go up the slope, you turn there, and then you come back up. If you'd cropped it a bit earlier, it might have been sort of slightly more confusing as to where else it went. So that's a good call with your ratios for that. So I think that's a really good crop, that one. I think you should feel pleased with it, and I think the black and white choice of black and white conversion as well also works well there, John. So I think smug points to you for that one. So what else have we got? Well, rather amazingly, because we've only had 9 entries, I must admit I kind of was hoping for 4. I was hoping for more. It's a tricky one, this. I get so excited about cinematic photos. I mean, part of my whole way of doing photos, my narrative shoots, is I'm very often trying to create something that looks theatrical or looks cinematic. I'm very influenced by cinematic or painterly, but the cinematic has a kind of particular flavour to itself, and it feels like this year, even though this last year or two, I've been trying to get even more cinematic. And then doing this challenge, I've found setting the challenge and finding images to stick on the Instagram feed, I've really enjoyed it. I've had so much fun doing this, and somehow I was desperately hoping everybody else would have more fun with this as well. So I have to say, slightly disappointed I only had 9 entries, but each of you have sent something in. Smug points to all. I think that what I've discovered with this is that there are so many photos I've got where I thought it would work. There were photos that naturally looked, in my mind, a bit cinematic, but when I gave it the crop, it lost something. It didn't really work. And then there are other photos where I was slightly less sure of, but once I gave it that cinematic crop, it really intensified or even changed the narrative a little bit. And I found that fascinating and really enjoyable. And this is kind of what I was hoping to express and get across, is I think it's really worth going for and play with it a little bit more. As it is, because of we've only had 9 people send in, we're now to our final image, which comes from Robert. And I've saved this one up a little bit, I think, for the end, because I really love this one. I think this is so much fun. This feels really cinematic. First of all, you've gone for the ultra wide kind of shot, the sort of ratio of 1:239 or 2:4, and there's action in it. We've got this lad there reaching out in the middle of, and this beautiful curve, almost balletic in shape, and in the middle of something. He's calling out to someone, he's reaching out to something. You really have that sense of anticipation for the next moment. So Robert goes on to say about this photo. This photo was taken last year in Paris, outside the Modern Art Museum. It was the blue hour, so it was a little dark and a bit grainy. This is a skateboarder who has just lost his board. He was heading to a woman and almost hit her. This was taken in a burst, so I have several expressions on his face. I have thought about making a triptych composition, but I haven't devoted enough time to it. I really like the aspect ratio for cinema and plan to use it in the future. And that's it. What you've got here, you really have caught a moment. Now, it's one of several, and yeah, it must have been really quite interesting to know that, as you say, got several different expressions on his face, and then you go through and you choose the one which has maximum amount of impact. So yes, if he's just lost his skateboard, it's heading straight towards a woman. In this moment, he's running after it and he's calling out, and he's desperately hoping he's not going to hurt anybody with the lost skate. And that's also that sense of space around him. You've got him in this dramatic, in the middle of a pose. It is, like I said, it's almost like a moment in ballet. Beautiful shape, and there aren't any distractions around him. We've got the tiling, and just enough to give it texture. A little ramp there, presumably, where he's been kind of leaping up, or on his skateboard. But the rest of the space is just there, taking it around him. And I absolutely adore this photo. So serious smug points to you for this one, Robert. I think you've done this. Fulfills the remit on every level, in terms of that anticipation, in terms of the crop, in terms of the spacing. Brilliantly done. So thank you very much for sending that one in. Did put a big smile on my face when I saw that one. Okay, Sandra says she sent in an image. What did you send me? Oh, you did, Sandra. You're absolutely right, Sandra. How come I've missed that one? Right. Okay, apologies. Yes, Sandra did send an image. Right. Okay, hold on. Right, we're not over yet. Yes, thank you. Thank you for pointing that one out, Sandra. I've got no idea how I managed to skip past that one. This is Sandra's one. Bright and colourful, and a real feeling of movement and everything going on. So, Sandra says, after last week's podcast, I had a play cropping some of my photos that I had taken in the Birmingham Pride in May 2023. It was a beautiful sunny day, which really brought out the bright colours associated with Pride. All of the photos I cropped, this was my favourite. I chose to lose the legs of the front three people holding the NHS letters, and found that this had the impact of pulling your eye through the photo to the 2 dancers behind, who were very colourfully dressed. I also liked the impact it had on all the photos I cropped. I think it made them more impactful, and it's definitely something I will do again, particularly when photographing parades or carnivals, as it really helps you zone in on the action. Thanks for doing this as a challenge. Yeah, well, that's brilliant, Sandra. Yes, I'm really glad that you found this to be a useful link, and I think it does. I think the cinematic one does work well, especially in a kind of street type scene. With this, it is beautifully colourful. There's lots of action going on, and what you've done here is, you say, you've kind of chopped off the legs to make more of the N, the H, and the S, the NHS kind of thing going there. What I found interesting, I was sort of playing around with this one, is if you decide that what you really, now you mentioned here that what what you feel it does is it helps bring out some of these dancers behind them. And that got me looking at the photo a bit more to say, well, could you get in a bit more of that? And actually, this guy has NHS on his t-shirt. So if we were to kind of crop in closer, something like this, maybe, then, or maybe to there, something like that, then the fact, actually, I tell you what, let's just open it, because I'm aware that my picture in the corner here is blocking part of the photo, which is ruining it somewhat. So we've got this picture here. Now, but there's a lot of building up here which we don't necessarily need. Now, if I hold my finger on the shift button when I grab the corner of this, that keeps the crop ratio. So we can take this and maybe, in fact, actually, I'll tell you what, rather than that, I'm going to go back to this one. Let's go ultra wide screen and see if we can see what we can do with this. It just gives us a little bit more of a crop in, because I don't think you necessarily need what's on the top there. I know you're concentrating on the NHS, but you don't need, if you like, the whole of the N. And I think if we pull that down a bit, we want to get those dancers in. We could grab that and pull that in even more. And if we've got enough of the H and the S here, and then probably we're going for the balance of these three people in that, then I think if you actually kind of take your crop down to there, and now we remove that, this then brings us even closer into the feeling of the action. We've got the people here, we know they're carrying something, we can see a bit of the letters there. Given the fact that he has the NHS across emblazoned across his t-shirt, we can probably guess then that they're carrying the NHS. But we feel closer and more intimate with the action, and now maybe these dancers come out a little bit more, the crowd is a little bit more, and it's not diluted so much by the big building in the background. If you're wanting to get into the crowd, get into the crowd. So yeah, I think it's a great photo, Sandra. I think, like I say, what's interesting with this is take your crop and then take it more and then take it more, and just sort of see where you can find the stories within it. Obviously, there comes a point you go too far, you pull back out, and you're always making choices as to which bits are more important. And I think this is one of the key things about the cinematic crop, is that invariably you end up having to get rid of, because not everything fits into the photo. You have to make choices about what you're going to lose, and that gets you to reflect that much more on what's really important. If I have to lose something, what's the most important bit I need to keep? And then once you've decided that that's the bit you want to keep, quite often it's intensifying, it's upping the game, improving, distilling the narrative even more when you do that. And so when you're on a photo like this, it actually distills that feeling of being right there in the crowd with all the chanting and everything that's going on. Now that I'm here, I can practically hear the yells and the shouts and the music and the drums and the dancing and everything that's going on. And that, I think that widescreen crop really helps to intensify that. So my apologies for nearly missing it there, and thank you so much for letting me know that you put it in. Don't quite know what happened there. But anyway, smug points to you there for certain. Right, a couple more comments here. What have we got? Oh, Janet said, I couldn't think of anything that felt cinematic and fit the crop ratio. Weather permitting, I have an idea to try something along these lines next weekend. Okay, excellent. Rosemary says, great movement and anticipation, Robert. Sandra says, great subject. And Robert says, thanks all. Kim, I appreciate it. And Susan enjoys, said she, super image, Robert, as well. Right. So, thank you then to absolutely everybody who sent in the images. Now next week it's going to be back to a feedback week. This week's been a challenge week, although getting little bits of feedback. Next week is a proper full-on feedback. I'm not doing anything else other than giving you feedback on your photos. So send me your images. Anything, whether it's cinematic crop if you want, or it can be any other subject, any other thing you want. If you have questions or you have a particular photo that you would like feedback on, then send it in. We have the Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres Facebook group. Put it in there or send it to me, kim@kimayres.co.uk. Tell me a little bit about the photo. Tell me what your sticking points are. This really is your opportunity to get genuine, real feedback on your photos, personalised to you. There are not many opportunities to get this on the internet. This podcast is dedicated to that, and next week's podcast specifically dedicated to it. I'm not talking about anything else, which also means if nobody sends me in anything, the podcast is going to be pretty short. So with that in mind, do start having a think about whether it's photos, you tried cinematic but it didn't quite work, but you're not entirely sure why, or like I say, whether it's any other kind of thing at all. Also, for that matter, if you have any ideas, if there's something that you would specifically like me to address, some aspect of photography, whether it's a genre, whether it's something technical, whether it's something narrative, whether it's about light or composition or any of these things, then do let me know. These podcasts are ongoing. I long ago ran out of coming up with all the ideas myself, so there's always kind of idea of looking out for new ideas for the podcast and to keep it going. You send me images, I can always give feedback on that, but if you have any ideas, specific things you would like to know about, then let me know, and then I can investigate it and explore it, and we can perhaps turn a podcast into it. Little reminder as well, if you find these podcasts useful, interesting or entertaining, then buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres is one of the ways you can support them. So, a final reminder that that the PhotoCrowd that I currently have, for any of you who are on PhotoCrowd who haven't done so already, there is currently a cinematic challenge going on in PhotoCrowd. I think it's just called Let's Go Cinematic, or is it just the Cinematic Challenge? Can't remember. Anyway, you'll find it easily enough. And so anything you've learned from this podcast, or the previous 2 or 3 podcasts for that matter, get in it, put in an entry for that. And remember, if you give me the cinematic crop, at the very least, and it's in focus, at the very least, you'll get the merit, guaranteed. There's a little bit of me just sort of heaves at you. I can't believe the number of people who are putting in square, portrait, or just ordinarily cropped photos, even though I specifically say, make it cinematic, go at a ratio of around about 2:1, give or take a little bit. I'm not getting too complex. I'm not saying it has to be 1:1.85 and that I'll be getting out and measuring the pixels. I'm not. It's just a general guide. I just wanted to look a little bit more cinematic. But primarily, have fun with it. That's the key thing. That's the key thing with all of this. Have fun with it. Right. Okay. So, Stacey says lovely shots today as well. So that brings us to an end. Thank you to everybody who's sent in images, and thank you to everybody who's been leaving chat in the comments as well. That pretty much brings us to a close. And get your photos in for next week. I'll do that. Take care. Bye-bye. Or just ordinarily say, make it cinematic, go at a ratio of around about 2:1, give or take a little bit. I'm not getting too complex. I'm not saying it has to be 1:1.85 and that I'll be getting out and measuring the pixels. I'm not. It's just a general guide. I just wanted to look a little bit more cinematic. But primarily, have fun with it. That's the key thing. That's the key thing with all of this. Have fun with it. Right. Okay. So, Stacey says lovely shots.